Welcome to Things Visible and Invisible, a podcast that discusses life, faith, current events, culture, history, and more, all in relation to Jesus Christ and his church. I'm Bishop Donald Hying. In today's episode, I will be exploring the wondrous life of St. Francis of Assisi as we celebrate the special year of Francis marking the 800th anniversary of his death. This year, 2026, Pope Leo XIV has named the special year in honor of St. Francis of Assisi. That is because he died, his sacred transitus, his passing, was October 3rd, 1226. And so this year marks the 800th anniversary of the death of one of the world's and the church's most beloved saints. For the first time ever, his relics, his bones, were exposed for veneration in Assisi, and crowds flocked to venerate the relics of this beloved man of God. The world over, Francis of Assisi, we could argue, is the most popular Catholic saint, acknowledged by nature lovers, Protestants, people of all faith, people of no faith at all. He's this universal figure of a great appeal. What explains such an extraordinary popularity? What is the phenomenon of St. Francis, the mystery of his heart that we can unlock and hope to imitate in our own limited way? In this episode, I'll simply speak about basic facts of his life. He was born in 1181 in Assisi. His father was a wealthy and prosperous cloth merchant and really symbolized the emergence of a new middle class in Italy in the latter Middle Ages. His mother was French. Francis was baptized Giovanni, John, but because his father loved all things French and his mother was French herself, his nickname was Francesco, Francis. He grew up as a very privileged young man. He was in love with knighthood. He was intrigued by troubadours, this life of chivalry and romance. He was the life of every party, wore fine clothes, had rich friends, spent money lavishly. He was the talk and promise of Assisi. In 1202, at the age of 21, he went off in battle to fight against a neighboring city-state, Perugia, was wounded, captured, and imprisoned for an entire year. And he came home in 1203, very ill and near death. After his recovery, he kind of went back to his old life and he signed up for another war with another city-state. But very early on in that conflict, he had an extraordinary vision that brought him back to Assisi. And that's where his entire life changed. The things that he used to find attractive now were of no interest to him. God was working on his soul and he was seeking a deeper life, a life of purpose. He was seeking God, as assuredly God was seeking him. All that came together when he was praying one day in an abandoned chapel of San Damiano, St. Damien, and there the crucifix spoke to him and said, "Francis, rebuild my church, for as you can see, it has fallen into ruins." Francis took those words literally, and so he sold some of his father's cloth to raise money to buy stones to repair the chapel. This sent his father into a frenzy of rage, and so he locked up Francis in the house, beat him, and eventually brought him before the bishop, wanting to force Francis to renounce his inheritance because his father didn't want his son to waste all of his money. And there comes a radical moment that is forever captured in the frescoes that adorn the upper basilica of St. Francis in Assisi. In front of the entire town, in front of his father, in front of the bishop, Francis took off all of his clothes and stood there completely naked and said, "Father, I give you back everything that you gave me. From now on, I'm no longer your son. I'm a son of the Father." Imagine the father's wonder, but also shame and perhaps anger. But that moment marked a definitive break in Francis' life. And from then on, he pursued this intense life of Christ. He became a beggar. He lived in the hills around Assisi. His former friends mocked him and just thought that he had lost his mind. He went to live with lepers. And lepers were a class of people that he had always been terrified of. If he saw a leper, he'd run in the other direction because he didn't want to catch what they had. A turning point, a spiritual moment of conversion for Francis was when a leper approached him, and instead of running away, he gave the leper the money that he had and kissed him. And in Francis' vision, at that moment, the leper turned into Christ himself. We see that so often in the lives of the saints, that they could literally see Christ in the people that they sought to love and to serve. It was not Francis' intention to found an order, but because of his lifestyle, because of his preaching, because of his example, within a year, 11 men had flocked to his side and wanted to live what Francis was living. And so we see in him this freshness of the gospel that oftentimes we as Christians can kind of sleepwalk through our faith and forget about the wonder of this life in Christ that we've been given. Francis was radical in the sense that he wanted to go to the root of things. He wanted to live his life as closely configured to the life of Christ as he possibly could. He wanted to take the gospel literally. And so in the founding of the Franciscan order, God was using this new movement to bring about fresh life in the church. The church is always in danger of becoming moribund, status quo, complacent. And so the church constantly sends us saints and prophets to stir us up and to bring us back to the integrity and passion of the gospel as it was preached and lived and incarnated in Jesus Christ. And we certainly see that in the whole Franciscan movement. Francis goes to Rome seeking approval of his order from the Holy Father, Pope Innocent III. And right before his audience with the Pope has this dream in which the Church of St. John Lateran, which is the Pope's church, his cathedral, was tottering and was about to fall. And suddenly this brown-clad figure steps forward and steadies the church. The next day he meets Francis, and he sees that this is the man of his dream. And so he realized that Francis was sent by God to shore up the church and to call Christians back to the fullness and joy of life in the gospel. So he gave approval to the order. St. Francis also founded the Poor Clares. So Clare was a woman of noble birth in Assisi who watched the whole phenomenon of Francis from afar and became not only intrigued, but desirous to follow him and to give her life in the same way of poverty, chastity, obedience. Her family has other plans for her. They want her to marry a rich young man in town. So she runs away at night and joins Francis. So she becomes the founding mother of the Poor Clares, the female branch of the Franciscan movement. Francis also founded a third order of brothers and sisters of penance. It was a fraternity composed of either laity or clergy who did not withdraw from the world or take religious vows. They're in the world, but they sought to live the ideals and the teachings of Francis. So his life as both a founder and really an apostle and a man of great burning love for Christ led him to many places. He went to Egypt during the height of the Crusades and met the Sultan, trying to bring about peace between the Crusaders and the Muslims. Even though that effort failed, the Sultan was very impressed with this poor man who seemed to come out of nowhere and spoke of peace and reconciliation and mercy. He tamed the wolf of Gubbio, which had terrorized that village. He was also the first one to create a living creche scene. So the whole idea of having the Christmas crib, the figures of the Nativity, started with Francis. He, of course, wrote the beautiful Canticle of the Sun. And then in 1226, he died maybe of trachoma and certainly of a life completely poured out for Christ. By that point, he was blind. And when he died, he laid naked on the ground and gave his life to God. gave his life to God through sister death. He saw as the sacred passage to the Lord. All those different aspects of Francis really converge and find their relevance and connection in his passionate love for Jesus Christ, crucified and made manifest in the Eucharist. So he saw in the poverty of the incarnation, in the poverty and humiliation of the cross, in the humility of the Eucharist, he saw the kenosis of God, that in Jesus, God pours himself out, becomes the servant of humanity, is here to serve, love, and die for us. And Francis' heart was so captured by that extraordinary love of Christ that it led him to live a life that most of us would find inconceivable, a poverty that seemed unlivable, but a joy that seemed and was supernatural. When we study the life of Francis, we see this extraordinary spiritual phenomenon, that this man who lived for just a few short years, but was a meteor in the heavens, a comet shining through the sky for us, leading us to Christ in a way that perhaps we will never see again. So as we ponder the life of Francis, we ask his prayers that we too may adhere to Jesus crucified with a burning love. Realize that the eternal Son of God traded his life for ours on the cross so that we could live forever. It was that truth that not only convicted the mind of Francis, but also melted his heart and transformed his soul, so that his whole life was this burning and passionate love for Christ. And he wanted everyone to feel that and to know that with him. As we honor Francis this year, then, we ask that his life, his spirit may find resonance in us as we seek to live the gospel with great passion and with a holy desire for God himself.